In the early hours of the morning, while much of East Africa was still asleep, the rain continued falling without mercy. For days, powerful storm systems had moved across the region, drenching cities, villages, farmland and river basins already struggling under weeks of heavy rainfall. But sometime before dawn, the situation changed dramatically. Rivers burst through their banks, floodwaters surged across roads and communities, entire villages disappeared beneath muddy water, and thousands of families were forced to flee for their lives as the floods spread with terrifying speed. Residents described waking up to the sound of rushing water smashing through homes. Some escaped carrying children through chest-deep currents. Others climbed onto rooftops and trees as the water rose around them. For many, there was simply nowhere left to go. This is the flood disaster unfolding across East Africa, one of the region's most dangerous flooding emergencies in recent months. Tonight, thousands remain displaced. Rescue operations continue across multiple countries, and authorities warn the crisis may be far from over. For several days before the disaster, relentless rainfall had battered large parts of East Africa. Meteorologists had warned that unusually intense weather systems were moving across the region. Heavy rain fell across river basins, agricultural areas, and densely populated communities. At first, many residents believed the storms would pass as they had before, but this time was different. Hour after hour, rain continued falling. The ground became saturated, rivers rose steadily, drainage systems struggled to cope. Then, during the early hours of the morning, floodwaters began breaking into nearby communities. Residents described being jolted awake by shouting neighbours and emergency warnings. Others woke to find water already pouring into their homes. Families rushed to gather children and elderly relatives. Vehicles became trapped as roads disappeared beneath rapidly rising water. Entire neighbourhoods were transformed into rivers within hours. Witnesses described seeing homes collapse as floodwater weakened foundations. Livestock was swept away. Farmland vanished beneath muddy currents. And in some areas, the flooding spread so quickly that residents had only minutes to escape. Many fled carrying whatever they could hold. Others escaped with nothing at all. As darkness slowly gave way to daylight, the scale of the disaster was becoming impossible to ignore. Large sections of East Africa were underwater. As sunrise illuminated the flood zones, emergency responders began assessing the damage. The scenes were devastating. Roads had been washed away, bridges were damaged or completely destroyed. Entire communities had become isolated islands surrounded by floodwater. Aerial images revealed vast expanses of water stretching across farmland, villages, and major transportation routes. What had once been fields and roads now looked like enormous lakes. In several areas, homes stood partially submerged. Others had been completely destroyed. Residents climbed onto rooftops waving for help. Families gathered on patches of higher ground waiting for rescue crews to arrive. Witnesses described watching floodwater carry away vehicles, livestock, building materials, and personal belongings. Some communities lost access to electricity. Others experienced communication failures as infrastructure was damaged by the rising water. Hospitals and medical facilities began receiving injured residents suffering from cuts, fractures, exhaustion, and exposure after spending hours trapped in floodwater. Meanwhile, thousands of displaced families started arriving at temporary shelters established by local authorities and humanitarian organizations. Schools, churches, mosques, and community centers were quickly transformed into emergency evacuation sites. But as the floodwaters continued spreading, it became clear that this disaster was far larger than many initially feared. Across East Africa, emergency operations moved into full scale. Rescue teams, military units, disaster response agencies, and volunteers were deployed into the hardest-hit areas. Boats became critical lifelines for communities completely cut off by floodwater. Helicopters conducted aerial surveys and delivered emergency supplies to isolated regions. Rescuers moved from house to house searching for stranded residents. In some locations, emergency crews carried elderly survivors through deep floodwater to safety. Others evacuated families trapped on rooftops after floodwaters surrounded their homes. But conditions remained extremely dangerous. Strong currents made rescue operations difficult. Debris floating through the water posed constant hazards, and continuing rainfall threatened to worsen the crisis. Communication failures further complicated emergency efforts. Some communities remained difficult to contact. Others could only be reached by boat or air. Despite the challenges, rescue teams continued working around the clock. Families gathered near evacuation centres waiting for updates about missing relatives. Parents searched for loved ones separated during the chaos. Children sat beneath emergency shelters watching rescue helicopters pass overhead. And while many lives had already been saved, authorities warned that the danger was far from over. The floodwaters were still rising in some areas, and forecasts suggested more rain could be on the way. So what caused this flooding disaster to become so devastating? Experts point to several factors. The first was the sheer amount of rainfall. Days of persistent storms delivered enormous volumes of water across already saturated regions. When the soil could no longer absorb additional rainfall, runoff increased dramatically. Rivers quickly exceeded their capacity, floodplains filled beyond safe levels, and water began spreading into surrounding communities. Environmental experts also warned that rapid population growth and development in flood-prone areas have increased vulnerability across parts of East Africa. Many communities are located near rivers and low-lying areas where flooding can occur with little warning. Deforestation has also contributed to growing flood risks. Trees and vegetation normally help absorb rainfall and stabilize the landscape. Without those natural barriers, water moves more rapidly across the land during heavy storms. Climate scientists point to broader changes in global weather patterns as another important factor. Warmer temperatures can intensify rainfall events, creating conditions for more severe flooding. Across Africa and other parts of the world, extreme weather disasters are becoming increasingly frequent. Floods, droughts, heat waves, cyclones, each placing additional pressure on vulnerable communities. And experts warn that unless adaptation measures improve, disasters like this may become even more common in the future. Authorities estimate that thousands of people have now been displaced by the floods. Many have lost homes, farmland, livestock, and businesses. For families who depend on agriculture, the destruction of crops represents not only immediate losses, but also long-term economic hardship. Emergency shelters continue filling with survivors seeking food, clean water, and medical assistance. Many escaped with only the clothes they were wearing. Some have no idea when they will be able to return home. Health officials are also warning about growing risks following the floods. Contaminated water supplies increase the threat of disease outbreaks. Damaged sanitation systems create additional public health concerns. And communities already facing economic challenges now confront the enormous task of rebuilding. Infrastructure repairs could take months. Some roads and bridges may require complete reconstruction. Schools and businesses remain closed in many affected areas. For countless families, recovery will not happen overnight. The floodwaters may eventually recede, but the consequences of this disaster could be felt for years. Tonight, large parts of East Africa remain underwater. Thousands of families remain displaced. Rescue crews continue working through dangerous conditions. And communities across the region are struggling to recover from a disaster that unfolded with astonishing speed. What began as days of heavy rainfall quickly transformed into one of the region's most serious flooding emergencies in recent months. But beyond the destruction itself, the disaster highlights a growing reality facing vulnerable communities around the world. Extreme weather is becoming more frequent, flood risks are increasing, and the need for stronger preparation has never been greater. For now, the people of East Africa wait in resilience and uncertainty as recovery efforts continue. The rain may eventually stop, the floodwaters may recede, but the impact of this disaster will remain long after the water is gone. This story is still developing, and tonight thousands continue hoping for safer days ahead.